The relentless pressure of Manhattan felt like an invisible hand squeezing the city's throat, but high above in the Thorn Tower penthouse, the air conditioning whispered a promise of relief that only a privileged few could enjoy. The Thorn Tower penthouse was more than just an apartment. It was a manifesto of power and fortune. Every square foot screamed exclusivity, with designs by renowned architects, a vast collection of million-dollar contemporary art adorning walls that seemed to float, and an automation system controlling every nuance of the environment with a touch. The panoramic view of New York, with its skyscrapers seeming to touch the clouds and shimmering lights stretching to the horizon, was breathtaking, a spectacle that few ordinary Americans, even the most successful, could ever dream of witnessing. But for Lara, accustomed to the simplicity of her family's small apartment in Queens, that oppressive luxury felt like a cold labyrinth, a crystal castle where she was just a shadow. Lara, in her early 20s and with a lifetime of dealing with financial difficulties, felt sweat trickle down her neck, even inside that sanctuary of luxury. The new housekeeper, with a salary barely enough to cover her family's bills in their cramped apartment, carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her ailing parents and younger siblings depended on her. Every ounce of energy was vital, and every moment of peace an unattainable luxury. Exhaustion was a heavy burden, but the city's unrelenting pace, that bone-rattling intensity that only New Yorkers truly understood, was unbearable. She had spent the entire day cleaning, polishing, organizing, every movement calculated not to leave a single fingerprint, not to mar the impeccable perfection of that home which wasn't hers. The aches in her back and legs were a constant reminder of her reality, a daily battle for survival. The thought of her ailing parents, the bills to pay, the need to send money for the rent of the small apartment in her Queens home, all of it tightened her chest. The private pool, a turquoise mirror beneath the glass ceiling, called to her with an irresistible promise. The water, cool and inviting, seemed a balm for her exhausted soul. The voice of reason screamed, "No, you'll be fired. It'll go wrong." But the desperation for a breather was stronger. She needed a moment, just one, for herself, for her body and tormented soul. It was a theft of time, a small rebellion against the life that suffocated her, but she allowed herself. With her heart racing more than any emotion she had ever felt, she made the decision. She glanced around, her heart thumping in her chest like a jackhammer's beat, and saw absolute silence. Nobody. It was her chance to breathe, to be, for an instant, more than the invisible housekeeper. She shed her uniform, revealing a simple, worn but clean bikini, and slid into the water. The relief was immediate, a pleasant shiver that ran through every fiber of her body. The water embraced her, and for a brief moment, Lara allowed herself to close her eyes, imagining herself on an isolated Caribbean beach, far from everything, without debts, without fear. The gentle murmur of the water was the only melody in that colossal space, a sound that for her was the purest symphony of freedom. She swam a few strokes, feeling her muscles relax, the tension draining from her pores. The Thorn Tower penthouse, with its transparent walls offering a panoramic view of the shimmering metropolis, seemed a universe apart, a place where the rules of life outside didn't apply. And for a few precious minutes, Lara felt herself a part of that universe, a mermaid in a private aquarium. It was then that the automatic door, almost invisible in the mirrored wall, slid open with a soft sound, almost an electronic whisper. Lara felt a chill run down her spine, a cold premonition that made her open her eyes abruptly. And there he was, Damon Thorn. There were no guards, no entourage, just him, alone, like a predator returning to his lair. His dark eyes, deep as a desert night, swept the room and fixed on her. There was no surprise, no anger on his face, just a dangerous stillness, an intensity that made her hold her breath. He was the personification of absolute power, every muscle beneath the expensive fabric of his suit exuding unquestionable authority. This was the man who governed empires, who moved economies, and now his eyes were on her vulnerability, in her wet bikini. It was a gaze that took her breath away, that made her feel completely exposed, even immersed in the water. He took a slow step, unhurried, like one who knows time is his ally. The silence was so dense Lara could almost feel it vibrate in the air. Damon's grave voice, when it finally broke the stillness, was a direct blow to her stomach. "You have two options, Lara," he stated, his words cutting through the air with raw urgency. A hunger for control she had never witnessed. It wasn't a request, it was an order, a decree. And before she could even process the audacity of those words, he continued, his voice low, but with the force of a judge delivering a sentence. "You can agree to fulfill your obligation to me starting now, or I turn you over to the police for property violation and breach of privacy. Don't think I'm joking. Your family, the one you struggle so hard to support, will lose everything. Their home, their dignity, their peace. I guarantee they'll be thrown onto the street without a cent, and you will be to blame. And you know I have the power to make good on every word." Lara's world crumbled in a millisecond. The threat was real, palpable, terrifying. It wasn't about her. It was about them. Her parents, already fragile, her siblings, who saw her as a hero. The image of them, helpless, with nothing, haunted her. Pride, shame, anger, all mixed in a wave of despair. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, in the hands of a man who saw people as mere instruments for his desires. The knot in her throat tightened, tears streaming down her face, invisible in the pool water. She was cornered, without escape. That magnate, with his hawk-like gaze and his incalculable fortune, had just placed her family's lives in the balance. The decision wasn't hers. It was imposed, cruel, inhuman. Lara Jensen's throat tightened, a knot of desperation and humiliation suffocating any remnant of air in her lungs. The icy panic that had invaded her in the pool now transformed into a wave of shameful heat, rising up her neck and coloring her cheeks. She wasn't a trespasser out of rebellion, nor out of daring. It was a matter of sheer exhaustion, of an aching body that craved a single second of relief, of an overwhelmed mind that needed a breather, a minimal reprieve from the life that crushed her daily. From a very young age, Lara had taken on the role of pillar in her family's small apartment in Astoria, Queens, which barely contained the love and worries of her loved ones. Her mother, with fragile health and dependent on expensive medications, and her younger siblings full of dreams she struggled to fund, were the engine of her existence. Every penny she earned as a housekeeper, every exhausting shift in Manhattan's luxury hotels, was earmarked for them. There was no room for her own dreams, for whims, or even for exhaustion. Life was a constant race against the clock and against poverty, a daily battle to keep her family's dignity intact. That day, the back pain, the fatigue in her feet, and the news that the rent would be late had pushed her to the edge. The inviting shimmer of the private pool in the Thorn Tower penthouse, a place she was only meant to clean and admire from afar, seemed like a mirage of peace. It was an impulse, a split second of rare and dangerous self-pity. She thought no one would be there. She thought she could dive in for 5 minutes, let the cool water soothe her muscles and soul, and then return to reality. What naivety! What a fatal mistake! Damon Thorn, with his piercing gaze and imposing stature, was the personification of power she could never even hope to scratch. He didn't just own that glass penthouse that seemed to float above Manhattan, but also an empire that stretched across unimaginable lands and fortunes. His word was law, his desire, an order. And now, his desire turned to her, an insignificant housekeeper, caught in a moment of weakness. "Police," he hissed, the word cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "Your family, their ruin." The ultimatum was brutal in its simplicity, a direct blow to her most vulnerable point. Lara Jensen felt her legs tremble, as if the ground beneath her feet had disintegrated. The image of her sick mother, of her frightened siblings, invaded her mind, more real and terrifying than the man confronting her. How could she explain, how could she protect them from the shame and destruction that accusations of trespassing and privacy violation, because that's what Damon would make it seem, would bring? The law in New York didn't forgive. Her family would be destitute, and everything she had built with such sacrifice would crumble in the blink of an eye. Her heart pounded uncontrollably, echoing in her ears. The options were few, and all of them terrifying. Yielding to Damon's blackmail meant losing her honor, her dignity, her very soul. but refusing meant condemning those she loved most to a future of misery and despair. It was an impossible choice, a crossroads of pain and sacrifice. A spark of rage, hot and untamable, ignited within her. What right did he have to do this? To play with people's lives? To use his power to crush the weak? She wanted to scream, to fight, to scratch that impassive face. But she knew any act of defiance would be useless, only deepening the hole she was in. She had to hide this fury, had to swallow her pride and humiliation, for her family's sake. Damon's eyes watched her, calculating without a shred of pity. He seemed to read every thought, every tremor in her body, every unshed tear. The automatic doors of the Thorn Tower penthouse, once open to the vastness of Manhattan, now closed with a soft, definitive hum. The sound echoed in the room, sealing not only the environment, but also her destiny. That sanctuary of luxury and isolation, which once represented unattainable opulence, transformed into a gilded cage, a stage for her torment. Lara Jensen swallowed hard, tasting the bitter tang of fear in her mouth. Her body was a fortress of tension, every muscle clenched, every nerve on high alert. The air felt thin, heavy with Damon Thorne's imposing presence. She was a trapped prey with no way out, no hope. What he was asking was more than a physical act. It was the surrender of her essence, the annihilation of her will. But looking into the abyss that opened beneath her feet, she knew there was no choice. Her family was everything, and for them she would do the unthinkable. The collision between innocence forced by necessity and absolute power driven by relentless desire had begun. The Thorn Tower penthouse's constant air conditioning did little. Lara Jensen felt a persistent chill, unrelated to the temperature. Opulence overwhelmed her, polished marble, silk, tech straight from a primetime drama. Glass walls showcased a panoramic Manhattan, shimmering skyscrapers stretching to the horizon. Yet this spectacle was a cruel reminder of the world she was now cut off from. She was a gilded prisoner, every luxury granted except freedom itself. Her first days blurred between disbelief and silent panic. Lara, her voice thick with indignation and fear, tried negotiating her release. She cited family, responsibilities, the profound injustice. She had no money, she insisted, to pay the debt Damon claimed, the alleged pool trespassing. But Damon Thorne was an unyielding wall of authority. His dark eyes, once fixed with primitive desire, now held calculating coldness. He set rules with a calm that terrified Lara more than any shout. "You are under my protection, Lara. Your family is secure, provided you remain here and fulfill your part of the arrangement. The debt isn't solely monetary." The implicit threat was as clear as the pool water that had sealed her fate. Damon was a man of few words, but each carried the weight of a royal decree. Lara was confined within the Thorn Tower penthouse. She would have everything: designer clothes, private chef-prepared meals, access to the pool gym, private screening room, but no leaving, no outside communication. Her cell phone confiscated, any contact attempt a breach of trust with undeclared yet dire consequences. It was a prison, yes, but with comforts most common Americans only saw in movies or on elite reality TV. A luxurious ordeal, she thought, a knot tightening in her throat. Initially, Lara felt profound hatred. How could a man be so cruel, so possessive? He'd destroyed her life in a blink, transforming her from a struggling cleaner into a luxury hostage. But as days passed, rage mingled with a need for understanding. She observed Damon closely, attempting to decipher his enigma. He spent hours in his office, speaking Arabic on the phone, his expression grave and unwavering. Other times she saw him by the glass, eyes lost on the horizon, the city below dwarfed by his thoughts. A subtle melancholy marked his unobserved gaze, a heavy weight carried alone. This sadness violently contrasted his projected absolute power. Lara noticed he avoided specific topics, particularly past or family mentions, save for direct orders. An old scar on his left forearm seemed instinctively covered whenever she caught sight. Small details, yet they began to crack Damon's impenetrable armor. He wasn't solely the tyrant who imprisoned her. He was also a man with his own ghosts, his own sorrows. Forced cohabitation fostered an uncomfortable proximity. Sexual tension, ignited by the pool, was now a constant electric current, palpable in every furtive glance, every accidental touch. She hated him, yes, but also felt a strange attraction to his inherent danger, to the raw strength and sharp intelligence he exhibited. Lara sought a loophole, a flaw in his control. She tried questioning him about her debt of service or about its duration, but Damon replied with short, evasive phrases, or simply ignored her with a look that forbade questions. He was a master of distance, even feet away. The Thorn Tower penthouse was his domain, Lara merely another possession, albeit one of growing fascination. His control was nearly absolute, leaving Lara at a dead end. Gradually, pure fear yielded to a complex mix of resentment and escalating curiosity. Who was this man, truly? What fueled him? Why did he want her here, imprisoned, when he could have any woman? She found herself thinking of him even when trying not to, dissecting his gestures, his expressions. It was like a chess game. He the master, she a pawn, striving to comprehend the rules. The situation wasn't as unilateral as it seemed. Yes, she was the prisoner, but he too seemed trapped in his own loneliness, in his own empire. This strange fascination both frightened her and compelled her to know more, to unravel the secrets of Damon Thorn, the man who had stolen her from the world to make her part of his. Every day that passed, the Thorn Tower penthouse, once a symbol of her imprisonment and Damon Thorn's overwhelming power, began to transform into a stage for Lara's observation. Immersed in the silent routine of that luxurious captivity, her eyes, trained by life to catch nuances and survive, started to see beyond Damon's impenetrable facade. She noticed the devastating loneliness that surrounded him, an emptiness that not all the world's golden power could fill. It was like a private desert, vast and endless, right there, atop one of Manhattan's tallest buildings. Lara observed Damon's rituals, the solitary meals at an immense table, where the silence was so dense it seemed to crush any sound, the long periods in his office, surrounded by papers and screens, but devoid of any genuine human interaction. The way he moved through the rooms, almost like a ghost in his own home, surrounded by luxury but devoid of warmth. There were no laughs, casual conversations, or the hum of a family. Gosh, his life seemed like a primetime drama without a soundtrack, Lara thought, with a pang of strange empathy. She saw the butlers and security guards, all distant, professional, but without the familiarity or affection she knew so well in her own Jensen apartment, humble as it was. The absence of human warmth in Damon's life was palpable, a vacuum that she, even captive, could not help but feel. Amidst that routine, Lara began to weave small acts of defiance, almost imperceptible, but significant to her and, surprisingly, to Damon. One morning, he asked her to rearrange an antique bookshelf in a completely arbitrary way. Instead of simply obeying, Lara, with a calm bordering on insolence, dared to ask the logic behind the arrangement, suggesting that perhaps organizing the volumes by subject would be more orderly. Damon looked at her with an arched eyebrow, a mixture of surprise and something Lara couldn't decipher. Before, to her astonishment, he conceded and allowed her to arrange the books her way. Another time he demanded a flower arrangement be moved, and she, with a soft but firm voice, suggested that the light from the Thorn Tower penthouse would better enhance the colors where it was, arguing for the harmony of the environment. He pondered for an instant, a thread of irritation crossing his face, but eventually assented, an almost imperceptible nod that did not escape Lara's notice. Damon, in turn, began to notice Lara's dignity and silent strength. She was not subservient, even under the threat of having her family reported to the authorities. Her eyes did not waver, her posture was always erect, and her every movement carried a quietness that radiated resilience. He realized that she refused to be merely an object of his desire or a pawn in his game. There were no pleas or whines, just a pragmatic acceptance of her situation, tempered by a passive resistance that intrigued him. The way she faced her challenges without breaking made him question what truly motivated her. He was accustomed to people who feared or flattered him. Lara, however, confronted him with a quietness that was, in a way, more challenging than any scream. A crucial moment, a small twist that began to erode Lara's foundations of anger and fear. occurred during one of the cleanings of Damon's private suite. While organizing a drawer of an old desk, Lara found, hidden beneath a pile of official-looking papers and old letters, a small carved wooden box with delicate designs. Her heart pounding, feeling even more like an intruder, she opened it. Inside lay an old photograph, yellowed with time. In it, a much younger Damon, perhaps a teenager with a genuine, almost childlike smile, embraced a woman with delicate features and a sweet gaze, who appeared to be his mother. The image displayed a happiness that was alien to the Damon she knew. The smile of that child Damon, so different from the hard, relentless man who blackmailed her, hit Lara like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the image of a happy family, but irrefutable proof that Damon had once been capable of pure joy, of being vulnerable, of having a love that seemed to have been torn from him. The photograph did not reveal the tragedy, but hinted at the loss, the absence that had transformed that smiling boy into the hardened, solitary magnate. That discovery made Lara question Damon's facade of brutality, humanizing him in a way she didn't expect. She began to see not just the powerful Damon, the ruthless boss, but the man behind the title, haunted by his own pains, by a past that seemed to have tripped him up and left him with deep scars. This discovery planted the seed of empathy in Lara, complicating her feelings of anger and fear. It was as if a tiny crack had appeared in Damon's armor, and through it, Lara glimpsed not a monster, but a wounded man, someone who had suffered and closed himself off from the world. That glimpse of vulnerability, of hidden humanity, mingled with her own pain and made her see Damon in a new light. It wasn't forgiveness nor acceptance, but an incipient understanding that not everything was black and white in that complex man. From that day on, the evolution of their glances and interactions shifted from merely transactional to laden with an underlying tension and mutual curiosity. Damon's eyes, once only controlling, at times lingered on hers with an intensity Lara couldn't decipher, perhaps searching for something he himself didn't understand. In Lara, caution mixed with a strange, almost dangerous empathy and a desire to unravel more secrets. The words exchanged, still few and formal, seemed to carry an invisible weight, a tension that was more than just the power dynamic. It was a silent game of chess, where every move, every sustained gaze, every small concession or resistance revealed a little more of the players. Respect, though reluctant and unverbalized, began to blossom in the arid terrain of their relationship. The fragile new dynamic, freshly built on silent respect, was abruptly put to the test. A persistent buzz from the Thorn Tower penthouse intercom, a sound rarely heard, echoed through the space, shattering the almost sacred silence Damon and Lara had established. Damon Thorn's gaze, previously fixed on a digital document, shifted to Lara, who was finishing organizing some papers on the coffee table. A silent warning passed between them, an electricity of apprehension that precedes a storm. Damon answered, and the melodic voice, yet imbued with a tone Lara already identified as authoritarian, of his sister Serafina Thorn filled the air. "I'm at the door, brother. We need to discuss preparations for the board meeting. Don't tell me you're too busy for your own family." The phrase, spoken with forced charm, was a disguised order. Damon hung up the intercom, his dark eyes fixed on Lara's. "Serafina is here. You will be my new personal assistant. Don't question it. Just follow my script," he instructed, his voice low but firm, leaving no room for objection. Lara felt a shiver down her spine. Being Damon's personal assistant was a dangerous facade, a charade that placed her directly in Serafina's line of fire. A woman who, Lara knew from previous observations, exuded sharp jealousy and keen perceptiveness. She barely had time to assimilate the order when the automatic penthouse door slid open, revealing Serafina, impeccable in a high-fashion pantsuit, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She swept the room with an evaluative gaze, lingering on Lara for an instant longer than necessary. "Damon, my brother, what a pleasant surprise to find you here and accompanied," Serafina said, her voice smooth as silk but with a jab that Lara immediately caught. "Who is the young woman?" Damon, with his usual imposing posture, positioned himself between the two like a shield. Serafina, this is Lara, my new personal assistant. She's helping me organize some important documents for Thorn Enterprises. He gestured to the stack of papers Lara had just arranged, a movement that seemed casual but was calculated. Lara, feeling her heart pound in her chest like a pneumatic hammer, forced a smile, a respectful nod. Cold sweat ran down her back. Serafina, however, was not satisfied. Her penetrating eyes, which seemed to read souls, fixed on Lara. Personal assistant? How interesting. I don't recall seeing your name on Thorn Enterprises' hiring list, Lara. Where do you come from? The question was direct, a bullseye shot. Lara swallowed hard, but Damon intervened before she could answer. Serafina, please, Lara is discreet and efficient. She came highly recommended by Arthur Sterling, who saw her potential. We don't have time for interrogations about my staff. We have more urgent matters to discuss, don't we? Arthur's name, the loyal advisor, served as a seal of approval, a trump card Damon played with mastery. Serafina frowned for an instant, but the mention of Arthur, a figure of unquestionable respect, made her retreat slightly. As Damon and Serafina headed for the Thorn Tower penthouse's living area, Lara felt a temporary relief, but the tension remained, thick as expensive incense smoke. She retreated to the kitchen under the pretext of preparing tea, but in truth, to try and catch her breath and process the surreal situation she found herself in. To be Damon's personal assistant, a humble cleaner, pregnant with his child, on a stage set for his jealous and ambitious sister. It felt like a prime-time drama plot, only without the guaranteed happy ending. From the kitchen, Lara could hear fragments of the conversation. Serafina spoke of investments, of the need to keep the Thorn family image impeccable, of pressure from other powerful families. Everyone's eyes are on you, Damon. Any misstep, any whisper, and our empire could be shaken. Especially now, with the instability in the market and the search for new trade agreements. We need stability, an image of unwavering strength. Serafina's voice, despite her legitimate concern for the empire, was laden with a subtext of control and power. Damon responded with calculated calm, but Lara noticed the rigidity in his shoulders, even from afar. He spoke of strategies, of the need to protect the family's interests, of the challenges he faced to keep his legacy intact. It was a world of power and intrigue that Lara could barely comprehend, so distant from her Jensen's apartment, where the biggest concern was making rent at the end of the month. At one point, Serafina raised her voice, a sharper tone, and Lara flinched, fearing being discovered listening. And that situation with the technology supplier, Damon? That young woman's father? Things got complicated, didn't they? Arthur told me you had to intervene drastically to avoid a major corporate scandal. Was that why he suggested you isolate yourself a bit here in the penthouse? To avoid curious eyes? Lara froze. The young woman in question. The major corporate scandal. The father. The drastic intervention. A knot formed in her stomach. That didn't fit with the story of the violation of property and the debt Damon had imposed on her. Lara's mind began to race in circles. Could it be that her presence there, her debt, was a smokescreen? A way to divert attention from something much larger? Perhaps a problem involving the Thorn family and a supplier? Damon responded in a low voice, almost a growl, which Lara barely managed to catch, but Arthur's name was repeated. Arthur knows what he's doing, Serafina. And yes, the situation was delicate, but it's under control. No one needs to worry. I handle my affairs. There was a tone of finality in his voice, a warning for Serafina not to meddle further. The conversation shifted to details about Damon's agenda, about upcoming trips and meetings. But the seed of doubt had been planted in Lara's mind. The debt that bound her to Damon, the threat of turning her family over to the police, now seemed like a piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle. The silence that followed the departure of the foreign dignitary, a man of cold formalities and calculated smiles, was almost a balm, yet it carried the fragility of a truce. Lara Jensen felt a profound weariness, not just physical from the tension of the visit, but soul-deep, exhausted by the constant dance between submission and resistance. Damon Thorn, for his part, seemed like a marble statue, stiff, with his eyes fixed on the urban landscape stretching below the Thorn Tower penthouse. There was something in the way he carried himself, an exhaustion mirroring her own that began to chip away at the ice between them. Lara Jensen allowed herself to sink into one of the plush sofas, feeling the weight of the baby in her womb, which seemed to react to her every emotion. Damon Thorne took his time turning around, but when he did, the look in his eyes was less of a master and more of a man who had just fought an invisible battle. She watched him, noting the lines of worry on his forehead, the way he pressed his lips together. It was a glimpse of the humanity he so ardently hid, and for the first time, Lara Jensen felt a spark of trust bloom in her chest. It was a dangerous, yet undeniable feeling. "They want to know about the baby," Damon said, his voice hoarse, breaking the silence. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Lara Jensen nodded, hugging herself. "I know. I felt their stares, the veiled questions." She hesitated, then continued, driven by a sudden need to share, to be seen. "My family. They dreamed of simple things, you know. A steady job, a home that wasn't rented. My mom always said we had to fight, but without losing our joy, without forgetting who we were. My brothers. The youngest dreamed of being a basketball player, the middle one of opening a small coffee shop. And me, I just wanted them to have a peaceful life, without the worries of where the next rent payment would come from, without having to humble themselves." The last sentence came out with a bitterness she couldn't hide. Damon listened to her, motionless, but Lara Jensen sensed the attention in his eyes. It was a different kind of listening, not that of a judge or a captor, but of someone absorbing every word. She continued, her voice softening as she spoke of what drove her. "I was always the observer, you know, the one who read people. My mom always said I had a gift for seeing beyond the masks, for feeling what others didn't say. I always knew when she was sad, even when she smiled. I always knew when my brothers were scared, even when they acted tough. It's a burden sometimes, but also a strength. It helped me understand that not everyone who smiles is happy, and not everyone who ignores you hates you. Sometimes they're just lost." She didn't look directly at Damon, but felt the impact of her words in the heavy air between them. It was a simple truth, born of a life of privation, yet it seemed to strike the heart of Manhattan's most powerful magnate. Lara Jensen realized that her emotional intelligence, as more educated people would call it, was her secret weapon, her way of navigating the complex world, of understanding the nuances that wealth and power often obscured. She could see the loneliness in Damon, the pain behind the armor, in a way perhaps no one else ever had. Damon moved finally and sat in a nearby armchair, his eyes fixed on her. There was a new intensity in his gaze, a mix of surprise and recognition. You're not afraid to speak the truth, are you?" He didn't wait for an answer. "I never had that luxury. From an early age, I was taught that truth was a tool, to be used with precision, never with emotion. That vulnerability was a flaw, an invitation to betrayal." He paused, and Lara Jensen felt she was about to witness something rare, something Damon Thorne would never show anyone. He looked at his own hands, clenching his fists before relaxing them. "My mother, she died young. I was very young, but I remember the void, the way my father, the previous Thorne CEO, shut down. I was thrown into a world of duties and expectations. There was no time for grief, only to take up the mantle, to prepare for a burden that seemed greater than me. I was trained to be strong, relentless, but the most painful lesson came later." Damon's voice dropped, almost a whisper, but every word resonated in the penthouse's quiet. "I trusted someone, a cousin who grew up with me, like a brother. I thought he shared my vision, my ideals for the empire, but he saw only the power, the opportunity to bring me down. He tried. He tried to use my own family, my sister Serafina, to destabilize me. He leaked corporate secrets, tried to sow discord among the board members. The betrayal was so profound it broke me inside. It taught me that trust is an illusion, that loyalty is bought, not earned." Lara Jensen felt a shiver. It wasn't an apology, no, it was a sharing, a crack in the fortress he had built around himself. She saw the pain, the deep scar that betrayal had left, explaining the impenetrable armor, the self-imposed isolation, the distrust in every gaze. The debt he had imposed on her wasn't just about possession, but about control, about never being vulnerable again. Damon raised his eyes, meeting Lara Jensen's, and the intensity was almost painful. Since then, I've lived surrounded by people, but alone. No one ever truly saw me. No one ever cared to look beyond Thorn. They see the power, the wealth, the Thorn name, but you... He shook his head, a gesture of perplexity. You see me. You see the loneliness. You see the man behind the title. And that's something I never thought I'd feel again. The confession, uttered with unexpected sincerity, hit Lara Jensen deep in her soul. Her defenses, already shaken, crumbled completely. She was no longer just the blackmailed cleaner, nor he the oppressive magnate. In that moment, they were just two lonely souls, trapped in a labyrinth of expectations and pain, who had found an echo in each other. The dynamic between them began to transform from captor and captive into something far more complex and dangerous, a connection Lara Jensen didn't know if she could endure, but which already enveloped her like an invisible web. The days that followed that night of confessions were marked by a different kind of quietness. The tension still existed, but now it was permeated by mutual curiosity, a silent need to understand each other. Damon, once so distant, began to seek Lara Jensen's company, not with demands, but with a subtle presence. He observed her, asked questions about her life, about her opinions, something he had never done before. Lara Jensen, in turn, found herself increasingly involved in the magnate's complexity, unraveling layers of a man who was much more than a facade of power. The pregnancy advanced, and with it, the reality of a shared future became undeniable. The Manhattan East Medical Center was visited regularly, and each ultrasound brought a new wave of emotions. Damon, surprisingly, was present at every appointment, his serious demeanor softening as he listened to the baby's heartbeat. He found himself taking Lara Jensen's hand, an automatic, almost protective gesture which she didn't reject. That baby, which had been the instrument of her captivity, now seemed to be the bridge to an emotional freedom neither of them knew they yearned for. Serafina Thorn, Damon's sister, noticed the change. Her stares became more incisive, her visits more frequent and full of venomous insinuations. She tried to undermine Lara Jensen's trust, whispering about the fate of ordinary women who got involved with powerful men, about the fleeting nature of powerful men's affections. But Serafina's words no longer held the same power. Lara Jensen had seen Damon's vulnerability, had touched his pain, and knew that this connection was different from anything Serafina could imagine. The debt that bound her to Damon, the threat of turning her family over to the authorities for property violation and privacy breach, now seemed a piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle, but the pieces were starting to fall into place in an unexpected way. The truth was, Damon no longer mentioned the debt. He saw her not as a possession, but as an integral part of his life, a woman who had penetrated his solitude and planted a seed of hope. The day of the birth arrived with the intensity of a hurricane. Lara Jensen was rushed to the Manhattan East Medical Center, and Damon, who normally controlled everything with calculated calm, was visibly anxious. He didn't leave her side for an instant, holding her hand with a strength that conveyed support, not imposition. The hours dragged on, and when the strong, healthy cry of a baby echoed through the room, Damon felt something break inside him, something he had guarded his entire life. It was a boy, a little Thorn, with Damon's dark eyes and Lara Jensen's silent resilience. As he held his son in his arms, Damon felt a torrent of love and protection flood him, washing away years of bitterness and isolation. He looked at Lara Jensen, exhausted but with a radiant smile on her face, and saw not a captive but the mother of his son, the woman who had awakened his soul. "Lara," he said, his voice choked, "the debt, it's paid. There is no more debt." He paused, his eyes fixed on hers. "I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay, with me, with our son. I love you." Those words, uttered with such raw and unexpected vulnerability, surprised Lara Jensen, but didn't shock her. She already saw him. She already loved him. The news of the heir's birth and Damon's declaration reverberated throughout Thorn Enterprises HQ. Serafina tried to protest, arguing about lineage and tradition, but Damon confronted her with a new authority, one that came not just from his title, but from his heart. "This is my son, Serafina, and Lara Jensen is his mother. They are my family, and my family is non-negotiable." He ensured that Lara Jensen's family would be cared for, that they would have a dignified life, not as a payment, but as a gesture of respect and love. The Thorn Cove estate, once Damon's solitary refuge, became the home of his new family. There, far from the curious stares and corporate intrigues, they built their life. Damon learned to be a father, to be a partner. Lara Jensen, in turn, blossomed, using her emotional intelligence to guide Damon, to soften the edges of his hardened heart. She taught him to laugh again, to trust, to love without reservations. The story of Damon Thorn and the cleaner Lara Jensen became a whispered legend in New York. Proof that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, that vulnerability can be the greatest strength, and that even the most hardened heart can be redeemed by human connection. Lara Jensen, the humble cleaner, not only survived but thrived, building a family with the man who blackmailed her, but who, in the end, loved her with a depth he never knew was possible. She saw him and he finally saw her too. So, what do you think of this twist in Lara and Damon's fate? Hit that like button if this story caught you by surprise, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next narratives, and comment below what you would do in Lara's shoes. Your opinion is super important to us.